please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome back to RotoWire's signature NHL hockey pod PuckCast with Statsman and AJ, brought to you with support from our pals at Owner's Box with their new way to enjoy fantasy sports, and I'm having a ball with it, folks. Friends, my name is Paul Bruno. I'm in Toronto, Ontario, and you can follow me at Statsman22. My co-host is AJ Scholes, who's a great follow at AJ Scholes24, back in the co-host chair in beautiful Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Partner, we are 3 weeks into the schedule, and division races have some expected trends and some surprises. I'm particularly looking at what Florida's up to. They haven't even lost a game yet in their division.
Well, I mean, to be fair, they haven't played as many games as everybody else too.
That's
true.
So
let's call a spade on that one. But I agree. I think there are some, there's some intriguing. I think for me, Winnipeg's maybe further down than I would have expected with their net minding. I'll say the Rangers haven't been as good as I probably thought. They're at the bottom of the division right now. There's definitely some surprising ones there, but to give Florida credit, they have now played 6 games. They're 5-0-1. So to your point, Paul, they are playing better.
Exactly. And I think we nailed it with the California-based teams that are going to be struggling this year. They're in against some teams that are at the top end of that division that are some of the best in the league. So I think we got that one right. I think we got Toronto and Montreal right to be battling for the top spot in the North Division. So that's something that pleases me. And I think those teams are on a collision course at some point, finally, to meet up in the playoffs. And I can't wait to see something like that happen. But the Bruins are making life miserable for teams in what used to be the Metro Division there too. So I'm sure you have strong feelings about that. But AJ, before we go there, there's a bit of an ugly situation developing with the New York Rangers, and that's the Tony DeAngelo story, front and center. The general manager has already come out and said that he's played his last game in New York, and there's a bit of ugliness going on there. I don't know if we're going to find out all the details, but suffice it to say, this guy was one of the top scoring defensemen in hockey last year, and figured to be the linchpin on the power play for the Rangers, but he's got only 1 assist so far, and clearly his head is not right. There is something going on behind the scenes there. We don't know all the details, but he's done in New York, and I wonder if any team is going to rise up and try and take him on, but there are issues there.
Well, I mean, at this point, I can't imagine anybody's going to give up anything for him to help the Rangers out in terms of cap hit. Anybody could have claimed him. And let's be honest, if you look at kind of the basics of it, 25-year-old defenseman costs him 4.8 against the cap for the next 2 years. Like it sounds like a decent player to take a run at when you can get him for free off of waivers. But his play this season, as you mentioned, the offensive concerns, that game in Pittsburgh, his last game with the Rangers, he was on the ice for 4 of Pittsburgh's 5 goals, including the final one there. And then after the game, he apparently got into an altercation with Alexander Georgiev. The next day, Georgiev wasn't at practice for what they called maintenance, but obviously, that'll lead to speculation. So, I mean, we can start there. The on-ice play hasn't been very good to begin with.
Right.
And then you add in altercations with teammates, social media concerns that the team has. He was suspended for 2 games earlier in the season by the team for taking a bad penalty in the season opener, an unsportsmanlike penalty. So there's obviously a multitude of situations. And I think this latest one, getting into a fight with your goalie is probably not going to endear you to, the team brass there. And so, yeah, he's done by all counts. They're not going to try and void his contract at this time. So they're going to sit there with him on the taxi squad, maybe move him to the minors, but I don't think you want that kind of energy infiltrating your AHL team. So it's possible he sits on the taxi squad. He's not even going to be allowed around the team. They're not going to let him practice or anything. Right. So he probably sits on the taxi squad for the rest of the year. And then once they get this year behind them, then, a buyout of that last year of the contract, probably not terrible. So that's kind of where I think it'll end up.
Yeah, AJ, this is a situation where, on the heels of what happened with the Baseball Hall of Fame voting and all the discussion about some of the bad characters that are on that list, who are among the best statistical players in the history of the game, character matters in sports, and I'm really glad that the Rangers took a stand here, and I applaud them for that. As much as this guy is a valuable piece to the club on the ice, they figure that it's important to have a good dressing room. They don't right now with him. It's pretty toxic. And I give them lots of props for taking this hard stance. So that's a bit of an unusual way for us to talk about a fantasy hockey thing, but his position is one of impact in fantasy, and we got to talk about it a little bit. So anyway, that's that. Let's get back into our groove and talk about the updates for each of the 31 teams is what we're going to do. We're going to fly through this, but AJ, we're really proud of the fact we have two very good sponsors. One, our primary one at Owner's Box, and I'd like to give big ups to them and have you do our promo read there.
Hey, NHL fans, Owner's Box is here to reinvent the way you play fantasy sports this season. Owner's Box is not DFS. They are the first ever weekly fantasy sports platform that combines the best elements of the industry into one product. Owner's Box is a head-to-head elimination style format that keeps players engaged through live snake drafts, social interaction, and a new layer of strategy that allows you to become the ultimate fantasy GM. The best part about weekly fantasy sports is that there's no long-term commitment. Users are able to draft a new team every single day and participate in different types of contests to keep the fantasy experience fresh and fun, so you're never out of the game. Compete with your opponent over 7 days of fierce competition and get paid out weekly. No more falling subject to unfair payouts, as up to 50% of users win money. Owner's Box also allows users to brand themselves and engage socially across the platform in multiple different ways, add friends, create custom leagues, and rank up to elevate the trash talk and competition to the next level. Think you have what it takes to be a weekly fantasy guru? Head over to ownersbox.com and start making a name for yourself today. In honor of the NHL season, if you sign up free now, Owner's Box will match your first deposit up to $500. What are you waiting for? Head over to ownersbox.com/rotowire to claim your bonus and join the new wave of fantasy sports.
All right. Well, my partner takes a deep breath and comes down from that great promo read. I want to remind you that we're going to go through each of the 31 teams with our news and notes, and then follow that up with a segment on our DFS action for an 8-game slate tonight. So you want to watch for that, and be reminded that you can see both of these clips on YouTube at RotoWire Hockey. All right, partner, you go first this week as we wind our way through each of the 31 NHL rosters with our lineup and injury notes for each club. What's going on in Anaheim?
Well, yeah, not a lot of news on the injury front there. They've still got Josh Manson and Brendan Goulet out. I don't expect those situations to change. Derek Grant dealing with a minor injury, so that's not a huge impact for what the rest of their roster looks like. They went 1-3 last week. John Gibson took, all 4 of those games, 10 goals allowed in those outings. So, it's kind of what we expected out of Anaheim, that there wouldn't really be, a lot to cheer for this season. Unfortunately, John Gibson continues to, do what he can. And one of the problems that they're having is a player like Ryan Getzlaf still doesn't have a goal yet through 10 games, 5 assists. They've got starting to get some production out of Jacob Silverberg, and Max Comtois has his 3 goals, but really there's only a handful of guys that I think you would use in season-long or DFS contests, and even then it's probably hit or miss depending on number of games that week. So that's kind of what I see in Anaheim, Paul. Not sure if there's anything different that you see there.
Well, I'll mention a lot of stats. We both will during the course of this program. And our listeners should be advised that while there were a whole host of games on Monday night, they don't factor into the stats that we're reporting, because we're reporting weekly in the weekly NHL cycle, Sunday to Sunday, basically. So I can say, like John Gibson, to your point, was 1-3 despite only giving up 10 goals against last week, AJ. So he's pulling hard on the rope as we expect he would, but they're offensively challenged, and that's a big problem. And it doesn't help that Derek Grant, one of their experienced centers, is down and missed a couple of games recently. Over in Arizona, they were 1-1 on a light week last week, and they're playing very kitty bar hockey. There are only 3 goals allowed, but they only scored 3. And Christian Dvorak had 2 of those goals in one of those games. Now has 7 points in 8 games, and he's a lock in one of the top 2 scoring line pivot roles. Darcy Kemper is doing his part with a 2.08 goals against average in 6 appearances, and defensemen, and that means the defensive structure there is really solidified, and so that's one of the things that I really wanted to highlight. They have a whole host of youngsters here offensively that are doing their tricks and trying to generate enough offense. So I think I like what I see here. They got an experienced tandem in the nets, and they got a good crop of young forwards that are growing together, and a couple of vets on the blue line. So I like the mix in Arizona, and I think they're going to be a challenge for teams as the season continues.
I definitely agree. Obviously, Kristen Fisher picking up a day-to-day injury is a concern there, but I think overall, as long as he's not going to be out long-term, I think they can overcome that with guys like Larson Krause and Drake Kajula to really fill in on that left side with Fisher potentially out. In Boston, they obviously got David Pastrnak back, and he's producing decently, considering how long he was out. He did pick up. I know we weren't talking about necessarily last night's games, but he did score 2 goals last night, so I'll give him credit. I think what's impressive to me is he has 12 shots on goal in those 2 games. So obviously he's not afraid to fire the puck, and he's doing everything he can to repeat for that Rocket Trophy. Jake DeBrusk dealing with an injury. That's obviously a concern. He didn't play last night, didn't travel with the team. He's missed 3 straight. So it'll stretch the depth a little, but nothing that I don't think they can handle. Again, guys like Trent Frederick, Anders Bjork will get opportunities with DeBrusk out. Nick Ritchie, the one that probably benefits the most.
Yeah, and he has done his part, adding some physicality to a second line that is centered by David Krejci. I always like to highlight him as he insulates a second scoring line there. And Craig Smith moves up in class as long as DeBrusk is out of the lineup. I think he's a guy that could get the fantasy bump in that Boston circumstance, AJ. Up next, we talk about the Buffalo Sabres. They went 2-1-1 last week. Olofsson with a goal and 4 helpers led the offense. Sam Reinhart missed the last couple of games with an upper body injury, but flew out with the team as they head out on a 4-game road trip. I'm excited for the start for Dillon Cousins. This guy's a teenager who was rocking the Canadian colors at the World Junior Hockey Championships, and so I got a good long look at him. He's got 2 goals, and he's getting a top 6 look with this lineup right now. And behind them in net, Linus Ullmark is a guy that's kind of got the inside lane and the net minding situation. Played in 3 of the games last week, went 2-1, allowing 8 goals against. And that's a pretty competitive net minding situation, so it bears watching. I think it's going to be one of those deals like a win in, you're in kind of a situation with him and Carter Hutton there, AJ.
Absolutely agree. I think we'll see a pretty even division of labor unless one of these guys really takes it away. As far as Reinhart goes, the fact that he's traveling with the team, they're actually traveling this morning. They were going to travel yesterday. Snowstorms kind of hammering the U.S. East Coast right now, and so Buffalo delayed their trip. So all indications, that could honestly work better for him. Another night in his own bed at home maybe helps him feel a little bit better. If he doesn't play, right now they've got, Casey Middlestat taking that top left wing spot for the top line. I'd be surprised that I was surprised to see him there. I'd be surprised if he continued to fill that role. So if Reinhart plays, I expect, Olofsson and Reinhart will make up that top line. Casey Middlestat will be relegated to a bottom 6 role. For the Carolina Hurricanes, look, we have to talk about the Petr Mrazek injury. That's a big, big deal for them. Talk about the fact, it started out as, okay, leaves with an injury, no real timeline, going to have an MRI. And then suddenly yesterday that it was not as good as they had hoped. And surgery is not off the table. They haven't confirmed that he's going to have surgery, but as they said, it's not off the table at this point, which is certainly a concern. James Reimer will be the guy for them for the most part, although I wouldn't be surprised to see them, give Alex Nedeljkovic a look in between the goal. He's probably their heir apparent at this point, but for his part, Reimer sporting a 3-0 record right now. So why take the guy out? 1.99 GAA, goals against average, and so I think things will be fine for them. but obviously Mrazek was, going to be their kind of 1-2 punch there. Teuvo Teravainen also dealing with an injury, but there's a chance he'll be in the lineup tonight.
Yeah, for me, there's concerns offensively, though. That second line, in a bit of disarray. Nino Niederreiter still not delivering the goods on the left flank. But on the right side, they got a couple of guys that are dealing with day-to-day bumps, including Teravainen on the front line and Jesper Fast lower down in the depth chart. For me, that means that Ryan Dzingel might get an opportunity, AJ. This guy's a couple of years removed from 20-goal seasons, consecutive 20-goal seasons. Last year, he really stumbled backwards with a very poor season that qualifies as a bust, quite frankly, for me. And he's off to the same kind of start and ranks very low on the depth chart. He's got to grab an opportunity like this to right that situation, and has the opportunity right now. So keep an eye on him and see where they slot him. In Calgary, AJ, they had a team meeting after consecutive losses to Leafs and another one to Montreal before that. A shootout win followed that, backed by a 37 save performance by Markstrom. They won the second game in Montreal, handing the Habs their first defeat of the season. Before that game, David Rittich made an appearance finally in the net, spelling Markstrom. He had a four goals come in on him in that outing. So he has done nothing yet to challenge for the goaltending mix there. And Markstrom figures to get a big workload going forward until he gets sorted out. But they have a lot of problems in terms of scoring, AJ, because it's really concentrated among the forwards. Bennett, Levo, and Mangiapane, all top 9 wingers, but none of them has any goals. If there's one positive to note, I'm going to look on the blue line and say Rasmus Andersson has surprised me with 5 points in 7 games played to lead the scoring on this back end, even ahead of Mark Giordano.
I absolutely agree that they need to get those guys going. I saw a report that said Sam Bennett came into the season and said they were going to let him decide where he wanted to play. He said he was ready to play center, and that's where they started him out, but he apparently came to the coaching staff last couple of days and requested to move back to the wing. So that obviously is part of the factor there. He clearly didn't feel great at that center position, so he'll move over to the wing, and that's probably a better fit. But look, they're still getting production out of their top guys. Johnny Gaudreau, 6 goals in 8 games. Elias Lindholm, 10 points in 8 games. So I agree. They need more depth here, but certainly it's not all bad news when they're getting the level of production that they are from the Stars. We'll talk about the Chicago Blackhawks, who, if you look at the RotoWire depth charts and you're on Calgary, you don't see any red. And then you switch over to the Chicago and it's just red everywhere.
Yeah.
In part because they are dealing with a bit of a COVID outbreak there. Guys like Alex DeBrincat are out right now. They're still without, obviously, Jonathan Taves. At this point, I have no indication that he's going to play at all this year. We just haven't seen or heard anything about him. Kirby Dach's still out. Brent Seabrook's still out. So some of the big names that you're used to seeing in Chicago aren't there. But one guy that is Patrick Kane. And he's going to be who this team leans on. And so far, so good for him. 4 goals, 6 assists in his last couple of games. He's got 3 multi-point efforts in his last 6 contests. So if you're a DFS player, I don't know how you keep this guy out of the lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's probably going to be a season where that's what they're left to do in Chicago, is count his statistics. But in the Nets, a surprise entrant into the goalie mix there is Kevin Lankinen. He has 3 wins and 1 loss in 4 starts. We didn't project him to be in the mix with Subban and Delia in what looked to be like the weakest goaltending tandem in the league. It's only got a slight uptick with an unproven guy like Lankinen, but you have to like the fact that at least he's off to a good early start. You wonder, though, if he can hold up under the rash of injuries and COVID-related issues that this team does have right now. Next up, we're going to take a look at the Columbus Blue Jackets. They went 2-1-1 last week. The big news here is Patrik Laine expects to make his team debut this week. His teammate from Winnipeg, though, Jack Roslovic, has already played 3 games in there in a top 6 role, has 1 helper playing center ice minutes in a top 6 situation. Alex Tessier is another guy who's getting top 6 minutes here, and the youngster is also flanked by Liam Foudy, another teen who's getting top 6 time. Curious to me that one Max Domi has not factored into top 6 minutes yet for this team and may not for a while. He's in as the 3rd line center here, and that is a situation that needs to change in order for this team to be as good as it can. I think Domi has to dial it back to where he was a couple of seasons ago and really show that he can be a playmaking center and a viable top six option here. On the blue line, Michael Del Zotto, the veteran, got a PTO over here, and he turned it into a third pairing role where he's got 4 assists and a +8 mark, which is the envy of Brad Werenski and Seth Jones. These two have combined for only 4 points and a combined -15, -8 and -7 respectively. They got to right themselves, because that should be one of the best pairings in the league, and right now they're one of the worst.
I think what's going to be interesting to see is how things get shuffled around, including potentially Max Domi, once we get a look at Patrik Laine, and indications on that will come today when they hit the ice for their game day skates. So you're definitely going to want to check out, again, not to keep pushing them, but the RotoWire depth charts will show you where Laine is going to be. Do they put him with Roslovic on the top line? That's certainly an object. The guys, they didn't play together a lot in Winnipeg, but they at least know each other, so there could be a level of comfort there. Does that mean that Liam Foudy is out of the top six? Do they put him, in a third line role because they're trying to, ease him back in after not playing for a while? He was dealing with an injury before the trade, so maybe they put him with Domi on a, de facto third line. So I think it's going to be really important to know where he is. But regardless, I think he bumps up the fantasy value of whoever he ends up on a line. You can just slide the puck over to this guy and have pretty decent confidence that he's going to rifle it into the back of the puck or back of the net more often than not. In Colorado, some really bad news for the Avs here, as Nathan MacKinnon is expected to miss some time here. It's again been one of those bounce back and forth situations where early prognosis was that there wasn't a serious injury, but it's obviously severe enough that he's expected to miss multiple games at this point. So obviously, if you're a season-long guy with weekly lineups, it's probably too late, but if you can, you probably want to get him out of your lineup for the week. If you're a daily, season-long player, stash him away. I would imagine he'll end up on IR at some point if he is in fact going to miss a significant amount of time. Now, the question to me is who fills that top line center role. It would seem to be Nazem Kadri's spot to lose, but I think there's other guys that could compete, like JT Compher could get a look. They could try doing something like, I know Tyson Jost has been primarily filling a bottom four role, but to play with Landeskog or Rantanen, maybe there's something there. It's a tough one for them. He was the one guy that didn't really get hurt much last season when they had Landeskog and Rantanen out. So I guess it was kind of just his turn, Paul, unfortunately, and that's a big injury for Colorado.
No question. And really, to your point, AJ, they face the issue of, do they jumble 4 lines or do they move one guy from maybe a bottom 6 role? And I think Tyson Jost looks like a guy who should get a look here so that they don't upset the entire roster. I mean, Rantanen and Landeskog are 2 very skilled players, and not to say they don't thrive with MacKinnon, they certainly do. But I think they could help drive a line and could maybe spark something in Jost. And I'd rather see them do something like that than move the 4 centers around to different units. That's my personal preference, calling on my experience as a coach in minor hockey circles years ago. AJ, up next, we'll talk about the Dallas Stars and some good offensive numbers for a team that's primarily known as a defensive group. Dallas went 2-1-1 last week. I have a lot of time for Denis Gurianov. This guy has really developed quickly into a key cog in the offense. 1 goal, 4 assists last week. And on the back end, John Klingberg, 4 points as well. He is right back in the mix as one of the top scoring defensemen, in my opinion. Him and Heiskanen, that's a pretty dynamic duo in Dallas, driving much of the offense. They have a bit of a gap on the left side of the forward ranks. Joel Kiviranta is on the IR with a lower body injury that will cost him 5 games, but he could return sometime this week. In his place, Joel Dickinson has picked up some time, moving into a top 6 role among the left wingers in his absence. And keep an eye on that before game time. I'm sure AJ and his buddies in the home offices in Wisconsin will adjust the lineups for all teams, but it bears watching in Dallas to see who gets those top 6 minutes on the left side, because two pretty good centers at the top of the ladder there. Jamie Benn is another guy who returned to action recently with a 2-point nut on the weekend, slotted back in his familiar role as the first line left winger here.
For me, the concern with a guy slumping is never the fact that he's not scoring goals. It's when he's not shooting the puck that's a concern to me. And that's what's happening right now with Alexander Radulov. Last 5 games, no goals, and only 5 shots in those games. And so that's a bit of a red flag to me. Now, he does have 3 assists in those games. In fact, he's on a 3-game point streak because of those assists, 2 of them coming on the power play there. But yeah, again, that's a concern to me, the number of shots, including his most recent outing. He didn't even get 1 on goal there. So definitely an issue to watch. In Detroit, it's, more of the same in terms of what you expect out of them. Dylan Larkin, Bobby Ryan, there's a couple players that offer some fantasy value here or there, but for the most part, it's a pretty thin selection of options here. I think the biggest news there is Jonathan Bernier has been dealing with an injury that's kept him out the last 2 games, which means they're going to ride heavier on Thomas Greiss and potentially give Calvin Pickard a look. But, I think they have to at this point. Greiss, his numbers aren't terrible. I mean, they're not great, but 3.03 goals against average isn't outrageously bad. But he has no wins. He's 0-5-2 in 7 appearances. So I think at some point, I know they're not expecting much out of the team this year, and they continue to, stockpile draft picks and recover. But I think at some point you got to at least see what you have in a guy like Pickard or even Caden Fulcher while Greiss is struggling this much.
Well, and they've had to shuffle things around, including putting in an unproven 26-year-old Matthias Brome on the first line left wing, because they've had a bit of a COVID outbreak that's affected the likes of Robbie Fabry and Philip Zadina, and Tyler Bertuzzi's dealing with a bit of an injury. So those are 3 names that figure to be among the offensive leaders in Detroit. They're on the sidelines, and so the youngster gets a shot on the left wing of Dylan Larkin. There are worse places to land, because he's still one of the better offensive drivers in Detroit, and so he'll have a chance to show his wares. Bobby Ryan's kind of slowed down from his hot start, but that's 2 pretty good vets that Brome gets to try out with, and depending on the matchups, could be an interesting DFS play, I'll say, AJ, if he gets some regular minutes there. Up next, we'll take a look at the Edmonton Oilers, and boy, you need to keep up with the stats here on a minute-by-minute basis, the way McDavid and Draisaitl went off this week, leading all scorers with 12 points each in their 4 games played. I mean, Draisaitl, for his part, in the last outing against Ottawa, had 6 assists, AJ. That was 1 off the club record, set by some guy who used to wear the number 99. His name escapes me right now. But those 2 guys are certainly DFS plays. If you can fit them in there at the top of the ladder in terms of the price point on FanDuel, I'm sure we'll go through FanDuel and DraftKings picks later. And I wonder if you'll squeeze one of those 2 guys in. I'll tell you right now, I'm going to do that if I get the chance tonight, and I think I will. In terms of the goaltending situation, we've been waiting for Stuart Skinner to make his debut, and he got the chance in a shootout over Ottawa. It was an 8-5 victory. He looked a little suspect on a couple of goals, but you have to admit that he was probably really happy to see the offensive superstars take flight the way they did, take some pressure off him in his debut. And I wonder if he did enough to get another start in the next little while, because Koskinen has been playing a ton of games here, and he's been getting beat on a regular basis too. So they got to see what they can do to support him. Certainly a bit more defensive structure is in order, but it's not forthcoming. The offense from the defense, though, is Darnell Nurse picked up 5 points last week, and I really liked what I saw out of Tyson Berry. He looked completely different than at any point he played with the Leafs last year, the way he was running the power play. But again, that's probably a reflection of the dynamic duo up front.
Look, how many guys can say they gave up 5 goals in their NHL debut and won the game? I mean, I obviously don't have, the stats available to me to dive into that, but that's just ridiculous to say, as you said, a bit of a shaky debut, but to give up 5 and still get the win is something else, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
One team that is getting plenty of goaltending help is the Florida Panthers, and they have two guys that are seemingly unbeatable right now. Actually, they are unbeatable, not seemingly. And Chris Driedger is really holding his own. In fact, if you look at the save percentage, he's actually doing better than Sergei Bobrovsky. They've each taken 3 games. Driedger's a .937. Bobrovsky's a .894. So I don't know why you're paying Bob $10 million when you got this other guy making pennies on the dollar by comparison and producing just as well. So for what I thought would be a pretty heavy Bobrovsky split here, I think Chris Driedger has played his way into maybe closer to a 60-40. Right now it's a 50-50 split. I don't expect that to hold all year. Like I said, I think it just comes down to the fact that you're paying Sergei Bobrovsky, $10 million to play more than every other night, even in a weird season like this. So it's something to watch to see how they implement them. But so far, so good for those two guys. And this is another team that's really, for the most part, pretty healthy. I think what's interesting is they've had just enough kind of quandaries on the blue line that, despite Yandel being on the outs and, they're talking about trading him or him not really going to factor in with the team this year and all that. Well, he's played in every game. He's got 3 points in his last 2 games. So obviously, if the goal was to light a fire under his butt, they've obviously achieved that.
No question, AJ. And a good look at the forward ranks reminds our listeners that they still plan to play Barkov and Huberdeau on separate lines to drive 2 scoring units there. Anthony Duclair has been a very nice fit on the right flank on the top line. Barkov, for his part, picked up 4 points last week. We expect him to be a point producer, but Duclair has 6 helpers early on in the season. And the big surprise still remains, to me, Carter Verhaeghe. He's lighting the lamp. He's got 5 goals, 2 assists so far, and continues to defy us and say, I'm a top 6 player, guys. And so far he is. But if he falters, I look for a guy like Frankie Vetrano to move up in class. He's off to a bit of a slow start, but kind of is some offensive insurance in case Verhaeghe does falter. So we'll keep an eye on that situation as the season goes on. They're getting a little more offense than we thought in Los Angeles. Anze Kopitar leading the pack off to a great start with 12 points in his 9 games played. And Alex Iafallo, who had a breakout season last year, is proving that that's not a fluke. But he's been slowed in his last 2 games and is now dealing with an illness. We're not sure how serious it is. Jeff Carter is driving a second line from the right wing spot with a goal and 5 helpers. And Gabe Velardi, one of their young pivots who was in and out of the lineup last year, has 3 goals in his last 7 games, looking in line for center on the second line role at the moment. But the surprise for me is in the nets, AJ. Cal Peterson is the guy who moved up when the Leafs acquired their backup goalie last season. Peterson got into the lineup a little bit, and he's actually outplaying Jonathan Quick by a pretty wide margin at the moment. Big disparity in their stats so far, and I expect that could earn Peterson a little more of the share of the net. In terms of other news, Athanasiou and Lizotte, both early offensive contributors, are in COVID protocol at the moment, and that has to hamper this offense a little bit.
Well, Paul, yesterday, I will admit, was the first time I had concerns that this NHL season might be spiraling out of control. Now, hopefully, we saw this early on with the NBA, and they were able to kind of get things under wraps there. But, we had 10 players in New Jersey. We'll talk about them in a minute, but 10 players, games called off yesterday. I feel like every Monday there's been a couple of games that have had to get canceled, and that COVID list that the NHL releases every day seems to just continue growing. And so I will admit yesterday was the first day I had some concerns, and it's affecting everybody from Los Angeles to New Jersey. A lot of teams being impacted by this. And we'll get back to the on ice product, and I'll take us through the Minnesota Wild here. 2-2 last week. They've got a couple of guys banged up here as well. They've, Marcus Foligno is on the COVID list. Marcus Johansson is dealing with an injury. They've got Kevin Fiala suspended. No clear timeline on when they're going to get Matt Zuccarello back either. It sounds like, he was moved to long-term IR and what was more of a procedural move. It won't really affect his timeline to return. One good piece of news, they did get Cam Talbot back after he was out a couple of games, and he bounced back. 3 goals allowed on 25 shots in a winning effort in his most recent winning effort in his most recent contest. So there's good news, there's bad news there. I think Minnesota is probably doing maybe a little bit better than what I would have expected out of their performance. They've gotten better results out of Cam Talbot, I think, is what it comes down to for me, which has them sitting 3rd in the Honda West division.
Oh my God, I'll not get used to those names. Kaapo Kakkonen really did himself a favor by playing fairly well in a 6-game stint while the goaltending situation was in a bit of flux. So he's forced his way into the mix and the talk there. Well, Alex Stalock is still on the sidelines, and Cam Talbot, you're saying, back in the lineup. So there are some positives to report here. The veteran mix up front still shows Nick Bjugstad on the top center role, and Joel Eriksson-Ek. I'm glad they're giving these guys a look, particularly Joel Eriksson-Ek. I think he's going to drive this offense from the top center position, and even Victor Rask has chipped in with a couple of goals. So it's not as bleak as I thought it was going to be with the departure of veterans Koivu and Stahl in this mix. Now we get to talk about a team that I have to admit looks like the best one in the entire league, AJ. And nobody's ever heard me say that in 6 years about the Montreal Canadiens, but they're hitting on all cylinders, and they did crush Vancouver yet again. They got to be loving the fact that they've eaten the Canucks alive in their head-to-head matchups. They've got 4 wins in the bank in that matchup, only 5 games left. So maybe when they start playing some of the other teams in this division, they can be taken down a notch. But right now they got 4 lines cooking. Big time, and Jeff Petry leads all defensemen in scoring. He's better than a point per game right now. I don't think he can keep that up, but right now, certainly a DFS gem, and you wonder where his price point is going to be if he continues this production. He'll be in line for talk about the Norris division, the Norris Trophy rather, and he's actually got to be happy when he looks up and he sees at the center position 3 guys driving the top 3 lines: Philip Deneau, Nick Suzuki, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi, all doing their part to drive offense for this club. But Tyler Toffoli, the big find here, he is another guy that's absolutely feasted in terms of being part of the offense here, and one of the guys that's factored into a league-leading 6 shorthanded goals already this season for the Habs.
Yeah, I think, the one concern to me is the lack of goals from Philip Deneau. No goals on the year. And you're talking about games in which I had him last night in DFS, and I hadn't checked my lineup yet, but I checked the scores during the Penguin game. Obviously, I was watching that, and I saw that Montreal had scored 6 goals last night, and I was like, oh, well, Deneau has to have scored, right? No, he still hasn't. They've scored 6 goals. They've scored 5, 7, 5, a couple more times. And this guy just can't get on the score sheet for the most part. As I mentioned earlier, the concern is the number of shots. And the reason I used him last night is that game against Calgary, he had 5 shots. And I thought, okay, maybe he's coming out of it. Maybe he's going to shoot his way out of the slump. And tonight will be the night. Had 2 shots on goal last night, which is better than he had been the rest of the season. But still, it's just not there. And at this point, I think he's one of those guys that's going to have to get in front of the net and hope one careens in off a leg, off an arm or something, just to get the bad juju gone and get going in the right direction. I'll take us through the New Jersey Devils. Look, obviously the big news yesterday, at least their next 2 games are canceled. They had to add 10 players to the COVID list. And that includes, Blackwood's been on the COVID list for a while. So they added a bunch of other guys there, including Aaron Dell, who could have been a factor in their goalie mix. Andreas Johansson is out, Pavel Zacha, Michael McLeod, like 10 players to the COVID list is a lot. And so clearly, I don't want to say that protocols weren't being followed, because you never know where guys caught it, how they caught it. And I don't want to make assumptions there, but I imagine the NHL is looking into it just with the sheer number of guys that are out right now. Scott Wedgwood, so far so good in terms of, filling in as well as you can. I mean, to expect anything more out of Scott Wedgwood than 1-3-1 in his last 5 outings, isn't it would be too much. And you look at the raw numbers for him: 2.8 goals against average, 0.901 save percentage. These aren't terrible numbers for Scott Wedgwood. And I think if he had a little offensive support coming, then maybe there would be some more win columns. But we won't have much to talk about with New Jersey next week because they're not going to be playing anytime soon at this point.
Absolutely correct, partner. And one of the guys that I'm keeping an eye on there when play does resume is Mikhail Baltz. This guy came over for St. Petersburg, and I think could be a factor that helps change the outlook here going forward in the top six mix. Beyond that, there's a lot of question marks, and we'll get more information in subsequent weeks as they climb out of this early trouble with the COVID situation that has emerged there. In Nashville, this is a team that is getting some offense from the wing positions, but not at center. And that's a troubling thing for me. They went 2-1 last week, despite the fact that Johansson and Duchesne still remain goalless on the season, each of them only 3 assists on the season. That's not good enough considering the money that they're being paid to deliver, but they're each lucky enough to play with a star winger on this roster. Forsberg and Arvidsson have been productive with 6 points each on separate lines. So it's a very curious situation that the offense is being driven from the wing position as opposed to center. One guy who is looking pretty good on the comeback trail here, though, is Mikhail Greenland. There was some concern about whether he was going to fit in here in the offseason, but he's done well enough in 5 games played with 4 points to lock down a right wing role in a scoring line situation. The defense is scoring well below their usual pace when you consider the likes of Yossi with 3 points and Ellis and Ekholm only 2 each. In the nets, Pekka Renee's struggles continue from last season. He's a clear number 2 behind Ilya Sarokan, who is half a puck better in terms of goals against per game right now. And the save percentage is a big disparity: 869 for Renee, 918 for Saros. So the younger goalie who made inroads last year continues to drive his way through to the number 1 net minding situation in Nashville.
Obviously, you have to continue to be concerned about the lack of production out of Matt Duchesne right now. It just isn't there for him. 3 assists in 9 games is not what this guy was brought in to do in Nashville. And really, it has never seemed to be a great fit for them. So, if I'm looking at Nashville, there's a couple options. They moved Philip Forsberg to play with Duchesne to maybe try and get him going. So you can't blame it on his wingers at this point. He's playing with Forsberg and Mikhail Greenland. So I don't know what it's going to take to get him motivated and going, but clearly something isn't right now.
Yeah, and you can say the same thing for Johansson, though, AJ. That's, to my point, I'm sorry to interject, but 2 centers, they're getting paid big bucks over here, and they're not delivering.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with you. In Long Island, things have kind of come off the rails for Semyon Varlamov. I praised him in previous weeks about being on a 3-game winning streak, and now I'm going to knock him for being on a 3-game losing streak. So maybe that'll turn things around for him and he'll start winning again if I flip the script on him. But 0-2-1 in his last 3 outings, a .855 save percentage, simply not good enough. And unfortunately for them, Ilya Sarokan has not looked much better. He gave up 4 goals on 29 shots in his most recent outing against the Flyers. Now, I get the Flyers are a good team. They're hard to beat, but he's probably got to be better than that if they're going to win some games here. So there's some goaltending concerns for me as far as this club goes. I think there is not a team that's supposed to be built on high-powered offense necessarily, but when they are producing, it's only coming from one guy, Matthew Barzal, 10 points in 9 games, and after that it drops to just 5 for Anders Lee and Jordan Eberle. So there's not a lot of production coming out of guys not named Matthew Barzal. And then the goalies aren't playing the way you would want them to in a Barry Trotz coach team.
No question about that, AJ. Over in New York, we spent some time off the top talking about the DeAngelo situation. What that's done is shaken up the order of contributors to the defense from in terms of offensive productivity. K'Andre Miller moves up as a third scoring D option here. He's got 4 points in his last 5 games, including his first goal. But Adam Fox and Jake Trouba form a new power play defense combo on the top pairing. It's rare that you see 2 defensemen at the points, but that's what's happening with the Rangers. And as long as they can run through a number of forwards with an offensive upside in front of them, these 2 guys figure to get a lot of point production if they can hold on to the role in tandem back there. Pavel Buchnevich is one guy who's thriving up front on the top line with 7 points in 8 games played. That's better than was projected for him at the start of the season. And if he continues, it would make him a breakout candidate on the year for sure. Shesterkin has outplayed Georgiev in the nets, but both goalies post sub 900 save percentage, and that's not good enough. So the Rangers hope that they can improve that percentage a little bit. On the right wing and a depth role, Colin Blackwell had 3 points in 4 games played, but is now lost for 7 to 10 days with an upper body injury. Capo Caco has been placed in COVID protocol, so look for Phil Di Giuseppe to move up, possibly even into a right wing role in a second scoring line.
So I got a good look at this team over the start of this season. They've played the Penguins 4 times already, including last night. And here's what I'll say overall. This is a young team that's got a ton of talent that is starting to put it together already. And they're going to only get harder to play as the season goes on. In the next couple of years, this is a very good team. Alexei Lafreniere has been phenomenal, in my opinion, just going off the eye test. K'Andre Miller has been playing really well. Obviously, they've got Adam Fox leading the #1 power play there. And I agree, Paul, that the net minding needs to be better to kind of go with what they have in terms of the young talent on this team, and they are only going to get harder. If I'm being totally honest, I'm glad the Penguins have gotten 4 of their games against the Rangers out of the way now, instead of having to wait to play more of those games down the road. In terms of the Ottawa Senators, it's more bad news for Matt Murray, who got the hook in his most recent outing after giving up 3 goals on 9 shots. As we said, the trend continues. He has yet to play a game this season in which he's allowed less than 3 goals. So every game it's 3, 4 plus the 7 spot that got hung on him. Things just aren't good in Ottawa. And I'm not sure ownership cares as far as making a change goes. They've got the young picks that they made this year, and they might be in contention for another lottery pick next year, and that might be the plan here. So. The interesting things that I see on this team, that I know Alex Galchenyuk struggled a little bit last year, but to be a full-on healthy scratch for the last 5 games is a bit of a surprise to me. They've got Tim Stützle and Nick Paul and Tkachuk on that left side, so I know it's crowded, obviously, but I'm surprised to see Galchenyuk sitting that much, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah, well, this probably is last chance saloon for him, AJ. He's bounced around the league, and from being the 3rd overall draft pick, one in his draft year by the Canadiens, things have gone south after good early start to his rookie season in the 2nd year, but after that it's been nothing much to report. And the same can be said for the right wing. You talked about the left wing primarily. I'll say I'm concerned with the lack of production from veterans Connor Brown and Evgeny Dadonov. Dadonov has 1 goal. Connor Brown is yet to score, and that's your #1 and #2 right wing. So really, if they want to offset some of the big goal totals against them, those 2 guys have to pick it up. In addition to the centers, Josh Norris had a good early start, but tailed off. Colin White been so-so, and after that, Artem Anisimov is another guy who's been ranks as a big disappointment right there along with Galchenyuk. So a lot of question marks there for me in the Ottawa mix, and it's no wonder they're getting drilled every night. In terms of Philadelphia, this is a team that is not getting drilled every night, but they went 4-0 last week, and JVR leading the offensive parade, 2 goals and 6 assists last week. In the nets, Carter Hart and Brian Elliott split the goaltending. In 4 starts, they allowed a total of 9 goals against They don't need to be that good with the offense behind them, but they're hitting on all cylinders right now in Philly. And that despite the fact that Sean Couturier has only played 2 games this year. He's on the IR and will miss at least the next 2 weeks as well. So they're managing without arguably their top center and thriving this well. It helps that young Patrick had a decent start, but even he has cooled off with being scoreless in the last 3 games. He's still going to be in a top 6 role here. So I'm happy for him that he gets a chance to make good on an opportunity to find his offensive game and show people why he was drafted so high in his draft year there. Shane Gostisbehere is another guy who has kind of rehabilitated his image, getting top pairing minutes with Ivan Provorov after starting the season in COVID protocol. And we are only a couple of seasons removed from when he was among the leading point getters in the NHL. You wonder if you can find that mojo once again.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the thing that stands out to me, without a guy like Couturier, what you need multiple guys pitching in and playing well, because nobody's going to step in and single-handedly replace a player of his level. And you look at the goal numbers right now: JVR 5, Kevin Hayes 5, Joel Farabee 5, Travis Konechny 5. Are you getting a theme here? They don't have any one guy that's carrying the load in terms of the goal scoring here, and they're getting solid production out of a number of players. And so this is, I picked them to win the division, and that pick is looking really good right now. What's not looking really good right now is the Pittsburgh Penguins, specifically the D-core and the power play. To be perfectly honest, the power play has been abysmal the last several games. They can't buy a goal, and it's because they are not shooting the puck. I think that needs to be a theme for the power play, is they need to shoot the puck. It's very simple. As we've seen throughout hockey, when things aren't going well, simplify the game, and that will be the key here. The other thing is the blue line. Look, if you looked at the start of the season, here's what you probably would have predicted would be the top 6. Brian Dumoulin and Chris Letang, John Marino with Marcus Pettersson, and then Mike Matheson with either Jussi Riikola or Chad Ruhwedel. That would have been what you probably saw out there. If you are going with Riikola as that 6th guy, of those 6, one of them played last night, and that's John Marino. They are getting some big minutes from a guy like P.O. Joseph, who is playing his first NHL time and is looking phenomenal doing so. Chad Ruhwedel has seen a huge minutes. Cody Ceci logging astronomical minutes compared to what they would have expected out of him. A guy they signed off the street who couldn't secure a contract from a PTO in Nashville, and Yannick Weber is playing minutes for them. And then last night, Kevin Churchman plays in the NHL for the first time in 7 years. Let that sink in. This guy hasn't played an NHL game in 7 years and was on the ice for the Penguins last night because of all the injuries. So there's a lot of things that need to fix. I think the good news out of all of that is a guy like Joseph is playing well and seems to be setting himself up to have been not just an add-on to the Phil Kessel trade, but to have been a major addition to that if he continues to move forward the way he's looked of late.
And people are wondering about the linchpin on the back end, Chris Letang. He was supposed to be back in the lineup last night. AJ clearly was not. But you can expect that he'll rejoin the club very soon, and they can't wait. He'll probably log upwards of 25 minutes a game with all the other bumps and bruises on that back.
Paul, I got to interject. I think we might be able to wait when you consider how bad Chris Letang has been playing. I mean, he has not been good lately in terms of turnovers and stuff like that. So I'll wait until Saturday. Maybe the extra time off from not having the 2 New Jersey games will not only help him get healthy, but help him get his head right, because he has not looked good.
Oh, folks, my partner is hot under the collar here, and I know he had to vent a little bit. I knew we were going to be – I thought we were ahead of the curve here with our pace of our show, but the Pittsburgh component had to be dealt with, and I hope you feel better after getting that out, AJ. The San Jose Sharks went 0-2 last week. They're struggling worse than the Penguins, partner. And in net, that's where it's reflected the most. 2 veteran goalies getting hammered in their goalie stats. Martin Jones, .391 is the goals against, .871 the save percentage in 5 starts. Devin Dubnyk, who has been a steady guy most of his career elsewhere, has been almost as bad. 0-3, .323 save goals against average and a .902 save percentage. Those aren't great numbers, folks, and they got to be better if this team's going to contend. Kevin Labanc is trying to do his part to stem the tide offensively with 3 points in the last 3 games played. He's now in a first-line left-wing role. Ryan Donato locked in as the right wing on the second line with 4 points in his last 3 games. These are 2 guys that didn't figure to get as prominent roles as that in the early going, but there they are, and hope they keep it up. One guy who's had a start in the other direction, Timo Meier. I thought he would be a top 6 winger for this club, but he's listed as a left wing 3, despite the fact he has 5 points. He's putting him behind Patrick Marleau. I don't think that should be the case. They're doing Patty a big service by giving him top 6 minutes. The offense hasn't been there for the longtime veteran. So I'd like to see Meier in a top 6 role. On the back end, the struggles continue for Erik Karlsson. We talked about a couple other big ticket guys earlier in the show, and the theme continues here with arguably one of the better scoring defensemen in the league, limited to only 3 assists, but an ugly -8 in 8 games played for the San Jose club.
I echo your sentiments completely. I'm surprised that they're putting Patrick Marleau in a top 6 role here. His numbers are just not there. And again, I'll hark back to shots on goal. You've got a guy that through 8 games has 4 shots on goal. That doesn't exactly scream top 6, producer to me. Now, he's also not seeing any time with the power play, which that part is maybe a little surprising to me. I would expect that you would want a guy like Patrick Marleau maybe out there on the power play, but if maybe he's lost more of a step than I think, and he's not fleet of foot enough anymore to be out there. Talking about guys who are fleet of foot, and that is the St. Louis Blues. They continue to roll with 3 wins in 3 games last week. David Perron, 3 goals there. Shen with 2. Binnington continuing to lead the way. And look, this guy, another player that's been unbeatable, 5-1-1 in 7 games this season, a .918 save percentage. We talked about this early on, that there would maybe be concerns about not having a viable backup after Jake Allen leaves, but so far they haven't really needed Ville Husso, and I don't know that they're going to anytime soon. Brayden Schenn, as I said, he's got 6 goals through 9 games, and 5 of those coming at even strength. So he's not even relying on the power play to get it done there.
Yeah, for me, the surprise in St. Louis is that Zach Sanford is getting first-line minutes ahead of Mike Hoffman. Mike Hoffman was signed here to a pretty team-friendly contract, but I thought he would slide into a top 6 role. Jaden Schwartz, look, he's locked into a second line with Brayden Schenn and Jordan Kyrou. I like that group, and I wouldn't touch them, but I would flip Hoffman for Sanford in a New York second here, AJ. I like the Perron-O'Reilly mix as a 1-2 punch on that top line. We got a strong distributor of the puck with a sniper, and those are 2 guys that could be cheaper than average DFS value plays if you want to put them in tandem. Whenever the Blues line up against one of the softer touches in the division, that's a way that I'm going to go regularly this year, partner. On the back end, it's a lot of depth on the blue line. Justin Falk factoring a little more positively into the mix so far this season, a +11. To go with his 2 goals and 1 helper. That's a positive development here, where he struggled mightily last year to fit in. And maybe it has something to do with being partnered with a steady guy at both ends of the rink like a Torrey Krug, who he himself, the offensive numbers are not maybe among the league leaders, but 5 points so far in a +6. That's a pretty nice looking tandem of experienced guys manning a second unit. Colton Parayko and Marco Scandella are rated right there as another top 4 pairing in St. Louis. So the top 4 defensemen really in good shape. Vince Dunn is a guy on the outside of that group looking in, so good insurance there. And it's no wonder that Jordan Binnington's numbers are so good. In terms of the next club we want to talk about, it's the Tampa Lightning. They went 1-0-1 last week. And as they did last year, they paired their 3 offensive defensemen with 3 defensive-minded guys. And I love the fact that's a real luxury here to have 3 quality offensive blue liners in the mix in Tampa. So the likes of Hedman, Sergachev, and McDonough all offer DFS value, and depending on the matchups, you might even slot 2 of these guys into your lineups. That's how productive I think they can be from the back end. And they're surrounded up front with a wealth of talent offensively. But I like the fact that Cirelli has taken the next step in his career development. AJ now listed firmly as a center on the number 2 scoring line with 6 points and 6 games played, complementing his strong defensive game. He reminds me of Dougie Gilmour in the crossover in the development of his career many years ago, and I got an up-close and personal look at it here in Toronto. Vasilevsky in the nets has played every second of action for the Lightning. I wonder if he gets spelled at some point in the near future, giving McElhinney maybe a look, but 2.15 goals against average, .925 the save percentage. Looks like he's making a strong case for saying, I want the Vezina Trophy back, and so far he wouldn't bet against him. Tyler Johnson he cleared waivers, this guy, before the season started, largely on the strength of a big fat contract that was probably an albatross for this club. But not only did he clear waivers, but he is on the second line in the right wing role, and he scored his first goal of the year last game. You wonder if he's shaken off any ill will that he might have had toward the club for that shoddy treatment, but it was necessary with the salary cap issues that this team had. I'm a big fan of this guy, and I think he's going to prove people wrong before the end of the season to be a valuable commodity in Tampa.
Paul, you mentioned it that, Vasilevsky has taken all of the games for them this season. I think part of that is a benefit of them having had games canceled. They played through the first 3 weeks of the season, they played just 2 games a week, which is, pretty low compared to what some other teams. Now this week they've got 3 games, no back-to-back. So I guess I wouldn't be shocked to see Vasilevsky take, all they have 2 more this week. They played last night. And so I wouldn't be shocked to see him take both of those games. Now, the only caveat there is they are playing Detroit. So if they feel like that's a good opportunity to use the backup, to not have to rely on your number 1 guy. But for me, if I had to guess, I would say he takes both games in Detroit, maybe takes the first game of their back-to-back against Nashville on next Monday. And then, we'll see McElhinney take the next Tuesday game. So that's what I would expect for Vasilevsky at this point in time. I'll move on, and I'll keep the comments short so that you can keep them long, Paul. I'll talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs here. A little bit of good news on the injury front. Joe Thornton and Nick Robinson were both seen on the ice doing a twirl yesterday. I don't think this adjusts their time frame. Part of that is being on LTIR. There are limitations on when they can come back. For Jumbo Joe, the earliest would be February 15th. For Nick Robinson, you're looking at February 10th. I would guess that's probably early for what they will actually be back in the lineup for. Jack Campbell remains out after that leg injury. Michael Hutchison, no games for him yet either. Freddie Anderson also carrying the load. But when you have a guy like Hutchinson, I'm not sure I would want him to play. They obviously I should clarify. Campbell took 2 games, no games for Hutchinson. But at this point, why not continue to ride Freddie? Is that what you think for the goalie tandem?
I think they've got a very nice schedule, AJ. They play every second day at home, so the home cooking is in place. Freddie doesn't mind playing when there's a bit of a gap in between games, and they'll have a nice gap early this week. They don't play until Thursday, while they get to watch and scout Vancouver in 2 games in Montreal before the Canucks come to town for a pair in Toronto. So a very favorable schedule for the club, allows them the flexibility to play Freddie on a consistent basis. And he, while the goals against and save percentage are not where ideally he'd like it to be, the guy comes up with a big save when he needs it. Witness the last seconds of the game on Saturday night against Edmonton. The game was tied late in the 3rd period, and he made an unbelievable stop to preserve the point. They went to overtime, and then, of course, it was Connor McDavid time once again. But it's those kinds of plays that make Freddie very valuable, and it's beyond the numbers for me when you consider that he will come up with a big save more often than not for this club, and his win percentage in his career is among the very best in the history of hockey. I'll say that in his defense, when a lot of people might not even realize that. So the offense is clicking. The power play looks absolutely lethal, like they could score every time out, and it's really because they've got good balance in the 2 power play units. They split John Tavares and Willie Nylander from Matthews and Marner So they have two very strong scoring units. And TJ Brody and Mikko Lehtonen are taking turns driving that second power play, but Morgan Rielly on the top unit looks like the Morgan Rielly of a couple of years ago, and if he's priced accordingly, is a very good DFS value play these days. The Vancouver Canucks, this is a team that's not looking very good these days, particularly when they have to go and read French menus, I guess, in the concourse of their hotel. But they're getting hammered by Montreal, and it brings them down to earth after a week when things were looking up for them, but they feasted on the Ottawa Senators to pad their stats, and some of those numbers look pretty good. JT Miller, 5 points. Brock Besser, 5 points. Mott, 3 points. Patterson, 5 points. Pearson, 4 points. You get the idea. Denko was in the net for 3 wins, 3 goals against, but a lot tougher row to hoe this week. Besser came into action with consecutive 2-goal games before last night in Montreal, leading the club with 8 on the year. He's off to a big start. After a sluggish start, Pettersson has 5 points in his last 3 games before last night's tilt. So the linchpins of the offense delivering the goods. It's the goalies that are the problem here. Braden Holtby, who went into the game against Montreal last night with an excellent career record against the Habs, was drilled, and both he and Demko scored goals against well over the 3 mark, and yet their save percentage is over the 900 mark, which implies that they're getting way too many shots against here. Their defense looks really soft, and I pity them in matchups against Montreal and Toronto, because those teams will run and gun the Canucks to death, and those numbers will only get higher.
Well, to add on to your point there, Paul, you look at the shots allowed per game across the league right now. Vancouver 36.3.
Crazy.
That's 2.5 higher than the next closest team too. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Paul. They're getting absolutely just a barrage of rubber in Vancouver, and so far so good. They've been holding on with it, but something's got to give at some point here, and I imagine it's going to go sour for them sooner rather than later. We'll touch on the Golden Knights here, but they had 3 games postponed due to COVID. So just one game really in the last week to talk about, and it's been a while since we've seen them. Robin Lehner took that contest, got an overtime loss after giving up 4 goals on 25 shots, which allows me to reiterate the point that the best goalie for the Golden Knights now is Marc-Andre Fleury, who remains 3-0 on the year, undefeated with a .951 save percentage, a 1 goals against average. So Pete DeBoer, if you're listening, you need to play the flower and stop giving Robin Lehner so many starts, because it's not looking quite so good right now.
Yeah, if there's one question that I have, it's the center ice position in Las Vegas. William Karlsson logging big minutes as a second-line center, but Chandler Stevenson getting a lot of ice time and not really much production out of him, despite the fact that he gets to play with Pacioretty and Stone. His offensive numbers haven't really translated into that lofty situation, so you wonder if he'll be challenged at any one point. I'm looking at a guy like Cody Glass, who was a top prospect in junior and well down on the depth chart here, but I wonder if he gets a chance to light things up offensively if Chandler Stevenson continues to struggle. That might be something to keep an eye on down the road, and could make him an interesting stash possibility in the deepest of your leagues out there. The Washington Capitals, they were dealing with the COVID issue, sidelining some of their big stars. They went ahead and won 3 games last week anyway, led by Nick Backstrom with 6 points. Vitek Vanacek in the nets, 3 wins with 8 goals against, subbing in for their starting goalie. We're looking for Ovi to come back strong, and he did in his debut, scoring the OT winner against Boston in his first game back. We mentioned Vanacek in the nets. He's only got a 2.78 goals against average and a .918 save percentage. That's way ahead of Samsonov's early season numbers. So the youngster came from nowhere to make an impact early on. We wonder how that affects the goalie mix going forward. And it's only possibly getting more muddled with Craig Anderson remaining in the backup role. He has yet to take the ice himself. One notable change at practice that was noted recently was Connor Sheary skating at left wing on the second line ahead of Jakub Rana. He's a guy who held that role for the last couple of years in Washington, but he has been blanked for the last 4 games. So while there was some certainty in the past with the roster in Washington, with the COVID situation and a couple of guys struggling, there's been a bit more shuffling than we're used to seeing here in the nation's capital.
Absolutely. They did get Dmitry Orlov back as well. He played in last night's game. So they're starting to get all these guys back, but they are still without Lars Eller or Evgeny Kuznetsov. Justin Schultz has been out after taking a puck to the face. And that is really, so far, the TJ Oshie center experiment has worked decently well for them. I don't think it's worked so well that they leave him there. Once Kuznetsov and or Eller returns, he'll move back to the wing at some point here. But consider that this team won three games last week without having to, with having to shuffle around the center position and not being able to offer much there. We'll round things out with the Winnipeg Jets here, who played 2 games last week. Connor Hellebuck went 1-1 with 1 goal allowed. I think what has been most interesting about watching Winnipeg is they gave up 2 players to get Pierre-Luc Dubois. One of those players has already played a number of games for Columbus and Mrazek. Line is set to play tonight, but they have to continue to wait on PLD. So it's not surprising that they've struggled a little bit here. They gave essentially to date in terms of guys they've been able to put on the ice. They gave up 2 players for nothing because of the COVID protocols with coming across the border. So it is unfortunate that's been the case. I wonder how much that's going to complicate trades heading into the deadline. Are Canadian teams going to be less willing to grab guys, because they're going to have to wait? Are they going to be willing to trade with each other is the other side of that. So it'll be really interesting to see what this lineup looks like when you get him there. They split up Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele to kind of spread things out. So Paul Stastny is, anchoring that second line with Wheeler on his right. Nikolai Ehlers moves up. They've got Andrew Kopp playing on the left wing. Essentially, in my opinion, what they did was they took their two best wingers and put them with their second center, and then left their top center to play with the other 2 guys, hoping that, everybody kind of, brings everybody up together. So we'll have to see how that goes, but they need to get Pierre-Luc Dubois in this lineup sooner rather than later if they're going to remain a playoff team.
And then in terms of DFS value play, you've got some excellent value out of Andrew Kopp so far, 9 points in his early start. He's getting the left wing minutes on the top line with Mark Scheifele, one of the better centers in this division, I'll say. And so as long as that situation continues, Kopp is an excellent value in DFS play. One guy that I would ticket for trading if you got him on your roster in season long, though, is Paul Stastny, because when PLD comes into the lineup, he's going to get one of the top 2 center roles, and that means Stastny will move down in class, despite the fact he's had a very nice start to his season offensively with 6 points in 9 games to date. So, AJ, that brings us to the end of our look at the teams around the league. We're going to turn it over to a DFS thing in a little bit, but before we do, I want to give a nod to our second sponsor, and that's Monkey Knife Fight. Now that your season-long fantasy hockey leagues have started, this is a great time to check out our friends at Monkey Knife Fight, the fastest-growing site in daily fantasy. The NHL and NBA are in full swing, and the NFL playoffs are just about winding down with a little game this weekend. The time is now to take advantage of a 100% instant match up to $50 on your first deposit by using the promo code ROTOWIRE. Visit monkeyknifefight.com and use the promo code ROTOWIRE today. AJ, any final thoughts before we wrap this portion up and move on to the DFS?
No, I mean, I'm going to be diving into maybe some other teams this week with the Penguins off for a few days here. So I'll get the opportunity to watch some other clubs a little bit more this week.
Excellent. There's lots to choose from. There's Canadian matchups almost every night here, so I'm loving that aspect because the rivalries are heating up here north of the border, and I'm sure they are in the division that you favor as well and right around the league. In any case, that wraps up our look around the league. Thanks for listening to PuckCast with Statsman and AJ, RotoWire's signature fantasy hockey podcast, with the support of our main sponsor, Owner's Box. Please remember to send your comments or questions on Twitter. Follow me, Paul Bruno, at Statsman22, and you can follow AJ at AJ Scholes24. Don't forget, you can watch this pod on YouTube by looking up RotoWire Hockey. As always, we invite you to listen into PuckCast to get our tips to stay out of the competition in your fantasy hockey planning and research. Stay tuned for our DFS segment where we help you win money with FanDuel and DraftKings. I got to say it here, AJ. I've been on fire with 2 great weeks, and I was near the top of both contests that I was in last week, and I really hope that our listeners pay attention because we will win you more money more often than not.